You have probably driven past a sign that says no engine brake or no compression brake and never given it a second thought. But if you have ever been on a mountain highway and heard a loaded semi behind you unleash a stuttering burst of sound like a machine gun rolling across the valley, you have heard exactly what that sign is trying to silence. It is called the Jake brake. It is one of the most important safety devices in American trucking. It keeps 80,000-pound rigs from running out of control on long mountain descents. It keeps service brakes from overheating on 7% grades. It has stopped an uncountable number of trucks from becoming runaway missiles on highways that millions of people drive every single day. And yet hundreds of American towns have made it illegal. Think about that for a second. The device that prevents runaway trucks is banned in the same places those trucks drive through. So what is it actually doing? Why is it banned? And what does any of it have to do with the food sitting in your fridge tonight? The answer is not laziness, and it is not just noise. It is one of the strangest regulatory paradoxes in American transportation. To understand the paradox, you have to understand what is actually happening inside that engine the moment the driver flips the switch. It is genuinely violent. But let us start with what everyone gets wrong. The common reaction to a Jake brake is the obvious one. It's loud, annoying. Some driver showing off in the middle of the night. Shut it down, post a sign, move on. But that reaction completely misses what's actually producing the sound, because a Jake brake isn't a brake in the way your car has brakes. There are no pads, no rotors, no friction material. The Jake brake doesn't touch the wheels at all. It weaponizes the engine itself. Here's what's happening inside. A diesel engine normally runs on a 4-stroke cycle. Air comes in, gets compressed, ignites with fuel, pushes the piston down, exhausts out. When the driver flips on the Jake brake, the engine does something genuinely strange. It cuts the fuel entirely. And then, at the exact top of the compression stroke, when the air inside the cylinder has been squeezed to roughly 500 pounds of pressure, the system flips open the exhaust valve. All that compressed air, all that stored energy that would normally push the piston back down and turn the wheels, vents straight out through the exhaust stack in a violent burst. That's the sound. That stutter rolling across the valley is a column of highly pressurized air escaping each cylinder at engine speed, thousands of times per minute. It's the sound of energy being thrown away on purpose. And the reason drivers do it is math. A modern Class 8 diesel engine produces somewhere between 400 and 600 horsepower climbing a grade. When the Jake brake is active, that same engine can absorb up to 80% of its rated output going downhill. That's around 400 horsepower of retarding force, pulling the truck backward against gravity. It's like reversing the direction of the entire engine. But here's what almost everyone gets wrong about this. They assume a semi could just downshift and engine brake the way their own car does. They felt their car slow down coasting in third gear on a hill. They can't imagine why a truck would need something so violent to do the same job. The answer is that a diesel engine doesn't work the way a gas engine works. Not even close. And in the one specific situation where a driver needs the engine to slow them down the most, a diesel is almost useless on its own. But here's what that explanation misses. A gasoline engine slows itself naturally when you lift off the accelerator. That happens because gas engines have a throttle plate that controls air intake. Release the pedal, and the plate closes. The engine keeps trying to pull air past that closed plate, and that fight between the spinning engine and the restricted airflow creates vacuum. That vacuum drags against the motion of the pistons. The engine becomes a giant air pump working against you, and the car slows. You have felt this every time you coasted downhill in a lower gear. Diesel engines do not have a throttle plate. They are unthrottled by design. A diesel takes in whatever air it can breathe at all times and controls power by adjusting fuel injection, not airflow. Therefore, when a trucker lifts off the accelerator going downhill, the engine keeps breathing freely. Almost no suction, almost no drag, almost no natural braking. A 500 horsepower diesel coasting downhill produces roughly 20 to 30 horsepower of retarding force on its own. That is the engineering problem in a sentence. The truck is 80,000 pounds, often hauling refrigerated freight or fuel or construction steel, and gravity is pulling it down a 6% grade. The engine is producing almost no drag. The only thing keeping the truck from accelerating into traffic at the bottom of the hill is the service brakes. They are not designed to do this job. Heavy truck brakes turn friction into heat. Use them for a few seconds at a red light, and they stay cool. Hold them down for 3 straight minutes on a long descent, and the drums can push past 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Once drums get that hot, the friction coefficient between the shoe and the drum drops sharply. Drivers call it brake fade. The pedal still works. The brakes still touch the drums. But the actual stopping power quietly disappears. Mile after mile, the driver presses harder and slows less. And this connects to something sitting in your kitchen right now. But we will get to that. This is why runaway truck ramps exist. Those gravel escape lanes carved into the side of mountains are there because drivers run out of brakes. There are roughly 170 runaway truck ramps in the United States, and almost everyone sits at the bottom of a grade where a truck that lost its brakes would otherwise kill everyone in its path. Before 1961, this was simply how trucking worked. You went down a mountain carefully, you rode your brakes, and sometimes you did not make it. So when one man finally figured out how to turn the engine itself into a second braking system, it changed long-haul freight permanently. But the story of how he figured it out started with him almost dying on a California mountain pass 3 decades earlier. His name was Clessie Lyle Cummins, and yes, that Cummins, the same name stamped on the side of a significant percentage of modern diesel trucks in America. He founded the engine company in 1919 in Columbus, Indiana, and spent the 1920s trying to convince a skeptical country that diesel engines could do anything a gasoline engine could do. In 1931, he decided to prove it himself. He climbed into a diesel-powered Indiana truck loaded with freight and drove it across the United States on a publicity run from the Midwest to California. Somewhere on the descent into Southern California, commonly remembered as the grade through Cajon Pass, the service brakes overheated and faded. The pedal went soft. Cummins realized he was rolling downhill in a heavy truck with brakes that were not going to save him. He did the only thing left to try. He shut off the fuel and downshifted as hard as the gearbox would allow. The engine's own internal friction, modest as it was, slowed the truck just enough that he made it to the bottom alive. Most people would have counted themselves lucky and moved on with their lives. Cummins spent the next 3 decades thinking about what had actually saved him. Here's where the story turns strange. By 1955, Cummins had been pushed out of the engine company that carried his own name after disagreements with the board. He was in his 60s, technically retired, but still fixated on the problem of how to force a diesel engine to brake itself. He worked on it in a small California facility. His core insight was that cutting the fuel wasn't enough. You had to actively release the compressed air before the piston could push back down on it. You had to turn the compression stroke into a one-way energy sink. He filed the patent in the early 1960s. Patent number 3,220,392 was titled simply Engine Brake. It was granted in 1965, but Cummins did not have the capital or the factory to manufacture it himself. Therefore, he licensed the design to a company that made a completely unrelated product. Jacobs Manufacturing Company of Hartford, Connecticut, had been making drill chucks since the 1800s, a precision machining shop with no history in trucking at all. But they had the manufacturing capability to build the brake. So the Jacobs engine brake hit the market in 1961, bolted to Cummins NH diesel engines. Jacobs became Jake. The name stuck on truck radios and in shop bays across the country. Within a decade, compression release braking was standard equipment on nearly every heavy-duty diesel in America. But the name is also the exact reason the bans you see on rural highways are, in most cases, technically meaningless. And that is the part almost nobody knows. Here's the part everyone misses. Jake Brake is a registered trademark of Jacobs Vehicle Systems. It refers specifically to their brand of compression release engine brake. That means a town cannot legally post a sign reading, "No Jake Brakes," and enforce it against every truck. They can only restrict the general category. Common restrictions are compression release engine braking, unmuffled engine exhaust, and engine braking within city limits. So the signs you see that say "No Jake Brake" are often legally unenforceable on their face. The signs that say "No engine brake" or "No compression brake" or "No compression release braking" are the versions that actually hold up in court. Most truckers know this. Most towns do not. And this is where we're about to see how all of this lands in your daily life. Because the Jake Brake isn't some niche piece of trucking equipment that only matters on one stretch of mountain road. Every major interstate in America that crosses a mountain range depends on it. The Interstate 70 descent out of Eisenhower Tunnel, one of the highest stretches of interstate in the country. The Interstate 80 drop down the Sierra Nevada from Donner Pass. The Interstate 84 grade down Cabbage Hill in eastern Oregon, where loaded trucks lose 2,000 feet in 6 miles. The Interstate 5 Grapevine outside Los Angeles. The Interstate 15 descent through the Cayenne Pass that nearly killed Plessy Cummins in 1931. Every grocery store in Denver, stocked with produce from California. Every Amazon package shipped from a warehouse in Reno to a front door in Salt Lake City. Every tanker of gasoline delivered to a station in Flagstaff. Every refrigerated trailer of insulin and vaccines moved across the Rockies from a plant on one coast to a pharmacy on the other. Every one of those loads went down a grade where the only thing between the driver and the runaway ramp was Plessy Cummins' invention, doing 400 horsepower of work against gravity. That stutter you used to hear and roll your eyes at. That's the sound of a driver protecting everyone downhill from him. So here's where you actually land. You drove past that sign thinking you were looking at a noise ordinance, a town protecting its sleep, a reasonable rule against an obnoxious engine. What you were actually looking at was a 70-year-old compromise between 3 things at once: a trucker 2,000 feet above the town with 80,000 pounds of momentum and brakes that physically cannot handle the full descent alone, a diesel engine that fundamentally cannot slow itself the way the engine in your car can, and a rural neighborhood that did not ask to live downhill from an interstate freight corridor. The Jake Brake is still there. It still works. Drivers still use it because the physics have not changed since 1961. The sign is not banning the life-saving device. It is asking drivers to muffle it, feather it, and use it only where the grade genuinely demands it. One sign, 2 life-or-death realities, both valid at the same time. That stutter you used to find obnoxious is the sound of a man who almost died on Cajon Pass in 1931, still protecting drivers today. And if you think the Jake Brake story is strange, wait until we get into why a fully loaded semi legally cannot change lanes on certain stretches of American highway, and what happens to the national freight system when they do.